Morning glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. I'm Hugh Hewitt, live in the ReliefFactor.com studio. I hope you're watching on the Salem News Channel, listening on one of my radio affiliates as you go to work. I am joined this morning by Jonathan Schanzer. He is the Vice President at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, and he's been a frequent guest all over the world for the last 8 months since Israel was attacked by Hamas. Good morning, Jonathan. Thank you for being up early with me.
Good morning. Pleasure to be with you.
Jonathan, would you summarize for people your understanding of what Joe Biden and his administration has done about weapons delivery for Israel?
Yeah, I think we can sum it up this way that in the early goings of the war, they fast tracked everything. I mean, they were sending a ton of weaponry to Israel. I think the Israelis had a hard time even keeping track of what was coming in before they used it. I mean, because it was such an intense battle early on. Somewhere around March, the United States began to slow those weapons significantly, maybe even February. And the reason, at least from what we understood, was Ramadan, right? That the US was saying, well, you don't want to start some kind of a religious war with the Muslim community. And so they slowed it for that month of time. Then after that, we began hearing about possible humanitarian crises and things like that in the Gaza Strip. Turns out that was very overblown. But what we found out was that weapon shipments began to slow further. There have been a few that have been almost entirely shut down. The rest have just been slowing for the last several months. As we understand it now, the administration is saying, well, look, we were fast tracking this before, but now we're not going to do that any longer. We're going to have weapons go through the normal procurement channel, which could take weeks or months, passing through congressional approvals and the like. So that is the evolution of it. And it's happening just as Israel needs to prepare for what is possibly the largest war we've ever seen in the Middle East. And that is, of course, the war that beckons between Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon.
And I agree with you. And I think that Team Biden is attempting to deter Israel from striking Hezbollah, even though Hezbollah has sent more than 4,400 projectiles into Israel since October 8th. Hezbollah, and I want to make sure you get 5 minutes, Jonathan, to explain to our audience why is this happening? Because Israel didn't attack Lebanon. Israel's been out of Lebanon since 2006.
Yeah, well, look, what people need to understand here is that Hezbollah, the day after 10/7, began attacking Israel unprovoked. I mean, Israel did not do anything in Lebanon to start this. Hezbollah is an Iranian proxy, and so is Hamas. And so the moment that the war began in the south, Hezbollah said, okay, well, we're going to join in as well. And it's for that reason that for the last 8 months, I've been nervous, not about the war in the south, because quite frankly, it's as tough as it's been. It's been, I think, made tougher by the Biden administration. If the Israelis had their way, they could probably mop up things in the next 2 or 3 weeks and be done with it. But what is waiting up north is something very different. Hezbollah has something like 200,000 missiles and rockets and drones. It's a massive arsenal. Compare that to the 30,000 that Hamas had when this war began, and you can see why I might be a bit nervous. There's something like 1,500 precision-guided munitions in that arsenal. That means that they can really hit anything they want in Israel, unless that missile is intercepted. And that's, of course, a major problem because we're talking about the Dimona nuclear reactor or the chemical plant in Haifa or other strategic targets, possibly water, electricity, things that the Israelis need in order to survive. So we have those plus an army that is considered by the Israelis to be equal in size to the average European military. This is no joke here. This is Iran's most prized proxy. It's a state army, effectively, because there is no state in Lebanon. They've taken over the country, and we are now, 30 seconds to midnight as it relates to the possible war that is looming. And just to be very clear, the Israelis this morning are talking about how the army is starting to pivot away from Gaza, not because they finished the war to their satisfaction, but because they know that there are significant threats up north. And as you mentioned, more than 4,000 attacks. That is something that the Israelis are not willing to countenance right now. And so we're looking right now at new tensions, really unprecedented, I think, in terms of what may await.
Jonathan, I listened to Dan Senor's podcast, every single edition of Call Me Back. Last week he was talking with Nadav Eyal, a very respected Israeli journalist, about the fact that 100,000 Israelis can't live in Galilee, and they have to go into Lebanon if this doesn't stop. And Hezbollah has been in violation of the National Security Council resolution telling it to move back 12 kilometers behind the Litani River since 2006, and they haven't done it. And that the war, if it comes, has got to be short and sharp, and it's going to be devastating for Lebanon. It's going to be devastating for Israel. This brings me back to the weapons. They're leaving Israel defenseless in this war if we don't supply the weapons they need. It's an army. It's not, the villages are emptying of the people in Lebanon. They know the IDF has got to come in there, right? They know it's coming.
They know it's coming. I think they're trying, at all costs to try to prevent this. But let me just say, it's not as if Israel can't fight this war. They're ready right now. From what we have been hearing and what we've been watching and what we understand, the messaging coming out of Israel suggests that they have enough weapons to do this. But the question is what kinds of weapons and how much does the U.S. Want to aid this effort in terms of the specific kind of targets that are going to be struck. I got to say, I'm watching all of this, and I've watched the Biden administration for the last, obviously, 3.5 years, and the Obama administration before that. And what we're looking at is still, I think, an attempt to work with the Iranian regime, trying to keep a dialogue with them. I don't know if you saw this. It was a ridiculous news item over the weekend. We're apparently going to be having polling stations for the Iranian regime in their upcoming election. To be clear, they've just started a war 8 months ago. It's escalating. Their number one proxy is about to unleash on Israel, and Israel is going to unleash on them. And we're allowing them to hold polling stations here in the U.S. That's where I think a lot of this comes from right now. And it is just...
It's deep in the water of the Democratic Party. Ben Rhodes, the Metternich of MSNBC, believes that Iran should be a regional nuclear power, and it's insane. But I want to ask you the question I asked last week of Robert O'Brien and a few other people. Do you rule out Israel going after Damascus at the same time they go into Lebanon? Robert did. He doesn't think they'll go into... But Syria is attacking Israel not as often as Hezbollah. Hezbollah does it every day with up to 150 or 200 missiles. But Syrian militias, Iraqi militias are doing that. The Iranians are running weapons through Syria to Lebanon. Do you imagine the IDF will leave Syria alone while they take on Hezbollah if they do so in the next month?
Look, I think you're going to see Shiite militias out of Syria attacking Israel if and when the Northern Front goes. And when that happens, the Israelis are going to respond back. Now, I would say that there are some open questions about whether this is being done with the acquiescence of the Assad regime. Some say that he's completely lost control and that the Iranians are just doing what they want in and around Damascus or beyond. That is certainly a possibility, but I would say that keep an eye on every front right now. I would watch Iraq. I would watch Yemen. If the war erupts in Lebanon, you could see what we've been calling the ring of fire, right? Where, all the different groups try to fire at once and try to overwhelm Israel's defenses. That is something I would say is actually quite a possibility. And that's where I think the weapons need to come. It's those defensive weapons that Israel is going to need, I think. And it's really a big question for me about whether the Biden administration is providing them.
We should have two carriers there. Jonathan, last question. What would you ask if you were Jake Tapper and Dana Bash of Presidents Biden and Trump on Thursday night?
I would ask what the way forward is, not just on the war in the north. I would say, look, we're watching three fronts right now in a global conflict: Russia, China, and Iran. They are all essentially, rattling their sabers. They are pushing the world into a wider conflict. What is your policy for all of this? We don't ever hear it from Biden, and I've yet to hear it from Trump.
I hope they do ask that. Donald Trump has told me Israel's got to win, but they've got to win quick, and they've told me that on the air. So that's his bottom line: win and win quick. So I hope they talk about the Northern Front, Jonathan. Jonathan Schanzer of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy, Jay Schanzer on X. Make sure you follow him. He always is posting good stuff. Listen to him whenever he shows up. Thank you, Jonathan.